I'm Charlie Saunier from the Renegades of Puck, and this is the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. 1940-41, the NHL mandates the use of between periods ice flooding to improve the quality of the league's ice surfaces. Dick Irvin, who coached the Leafs to a third-place finish in 1939-40, leaves Toronto for Montreal. Hap Day, who skated for Toronto for 13 years, takes over as Leafs head coach. The Canadiens debut a pair of highly touted rookie forwards Elmer Locke and Johnny Quilty. The Red Wings install Johnny Mowers in goal as Tiny Thompson retires after 12 NHL seasons. The struggling Americans debut future star Chuck Rayner in goal. John Mariucci, a legend of Minnesota amateur hockey, jumps from the University of Minnesota to the Chicago Blackhawks. The Rangers' fiery Phil Watson and the Blackhawks' Joe Cooper engage in a bloody, stick-swinging brawl that leaves Watson cut and dazed. On the strength of their league-leading offense, 168 goals, the Boston Bruins capture their fourth consecutive regular season title. They finish with a record of 27-8-13. Toronto, once a devastating scoring machine, takes second in the standings with the NHL's stingiest defense, 99 goals against. The Maple Leafs, with Turk Broda in goal, lead the NHL in victories with 28, but trail Boston by 5 points in the final standings. Wally Stranowski, a Leafs backliner, wows the crowds with his length of the ice rushes. Boston's Bill Cowley sets new NHL records for assists with 45 and points with 62, and wins his first and only scoring title. Brian Hextall, the Rangers' talented right winger, wins his second straight goal-scoring title with 26 goals. Boston's Roy Conacher, beneficiary of Bill Cowher's expert playmaking, ties for second in the league in goals with 24. Maple Leafs left winger Sweeney Schreiner, coming off an 11-goal season, bounces back with 24, tying him for second overall. Boston's Frank Brimsek and Detroit's Johnny Mowers tie for second in goals against average with 2.13 behind Turk Broda's 2.06. The Stanley Cup champion Rangers struggled to a 21-19-8 record and a fourth-place finish. The retirement of Red Horner, Toronto's belligerent defenseman, opens the door for a new penalty king. That is Detroit's Jimmy Orlando with 99. On March 4th, 1941, the Bruins unleash a record 83 shots on goal in a 3-2 victory over the Chicago Blackhawks. 5 NHLers, Sil Apps, Gord Drillin from the Maple Leafs, Brian Hextall and Lynn Patrick from the Rangers, and Sid Howe from the Red Wings tie for runner-up in the points race with 44. Detroit, the number 3 seed, and the Rangers, the number 4 seed, meet in the Stanley Cup quarterfinals, and the Red Wings take the decisive third game 3-2. Chicago, the number 5 seed, and Montreal, the number 6 seed, clash in the other Stanley Cup quarterfinal. The Hawks win the decisive third game 3-2. The Red Wings win game 1 of their semifinals with Chicago 3-1, then sweep the Hawks on Gus Gierbach's winner in overtime. The Bruins and Maple Leafs go 7 games in the semis. Toronto takes control of the series in Game 5 when Pete Langell beats Frank Brimsek, putting the Leafs up 3-2. Boston's outstanding defense shines in Game 6 and 7. The Bruins beat the Leafs 2-1 in both games. In the finals, the heavily favored Bruins roll past the Wings. Bruins' Pat McCreevy pots the winner in Game 1 as Boston wins 3-2. In Game 2 of the finals, Terry Reardon and Roy Conacher score for Boston to win the game 2-1. Milt Schmidt breaks up a 2-2 tie in the second period of Game 3, and Art Jackson adds insurance as the Bruins take a 3-0 lead in the finals. The Bruins win Game 4 3-1 to become the first team to pull off a 4-game sweep of the Stanley Cup Finals. Milt Schmidt, the Bruins' center of attraction, is the top playoff scorer with 5 goals and 11 points. Bill Cowley, on the strength of his record-breaking scoring performance, skates off with his first of 2 Hart trophies. Montreal rookie Johnny Quilty, 18 goals and 34 points overall, which led the Habs, earns the Calder Trophy. Turk Broda, the burly Leafs goalie, wins the Vezina Trophy. Boston's Bobby Bauer takes his second straight Lady Byng Trophy. Boston's Bobby Bauer received his second Lady Byng Trophy as the league's most gentlemanly player in 1940-41, amassing 39 points while spending only 2 minutes in the penalty box. The Bauer family was legendary in Kitchener, Ontario. Bobby's brother David was a top prospect in the Leafs organization, and their father designed a line of ice skates that would go on to be worn by most of the game's top players. Brian Hextall retained his goal-scoring crowns in 1940 and 41, leading all NHL snipers with 26 red lights. A first-team All-Star in 1939-40, Hextall was honored again in 40-41, earning the right wing spot on the NHL's Dream Team. His Rangers dropped down a peg in 40-41, finishing fourth with a 21-19-8 record. Although they scored their share of goals, the defense allowed 48 more tallies than it did during the 39-40 season. One of Conn Smythe's shrewdest moves was trading 4 players to the New York Americans for that team's top star, David Sweeney Schreiner. A 2-time NHL scoring champion in the 30s, Schreiner joined the Leafs in 39-40 by 40-41. He was the team's leading sharpshooter with 24 goals. To obtain Schreiner, Toronto gave the Amerks Murray Armstrong, Buzz Bowl, Doc Romness, and the last remaining member of the kid line, Busher Jackson. Lynn Patrick was a model hockey player and Dorothea Davis was a model, so it seems only natural that they became one of hockey's most glamorous couples. On April 8th of 1939, they were married at the Marble Collegiate Church in New York. In 1940-41, Patrick had the first big season of his career, tying for the team lead in points with 20 goals and 24 assists while playing on the potent Patrick Watson-Hextall line. After 9 seasons behind the bench in Toronto and 7 trips to the Stanley Cup Finals, Dick Irvin brought his formidable know-how to St. Catherine Street to become the coach of the rebuilding Canadiens. Coach Pitt Lapine, who sat in during the 1939-40 season after the death of Babe Siebert, stepped aside to allow Irvin to come aboard. Irvin would turn the Canadiens into a superpower by 1943-44. Sid Howe did a tour of the hockey circuit before coming to the Red Wings during the 34-35 season. After stints in Ottawa, Philadelphia, and the hockey backwater of St. Louis, Sid found his way to the Motor City. Howe exhibited the hard-working spirit of the Olympia Stadium faithful, playing the corners, digging for the puck, and delivering timely body checks. In 1940-41, he compiled 44 points to lead all Red Wings shooters. Turk Broda established himself as hockey's finest netminder in 1940-41, allowing 99 goals in 48 games for the sparkling goals against average of 2.06. Broda led the league in victories with 28 and tied for second with 4 shutouts. He earned his Vezina Trophy and was selected the NHL's first All-Star team. In the semifinal playoff against Boston, he held the Bruins to 2 goals or less in 5 of the 7 games. A long line of Chroniclers have worn NHL jerseys. They all have had 3 things in common. They could skate, they could fight, and they could score. Roy Conacher was no exception. In 1940-41, playing left wing, Conacher led the Bruins with 24 goals as center Bill Cowley set him up with perfect passes. In the long march to the Stanley Cup, he helped the Bruins bring the mug home, collecting 6 points in 11 playoff games. In 1940-41, nothing could keep Bill Cowley from the puck. He galloped from end to end, digging across the line and sending pucks to the free man. Cowboy Bill set a new NHL record for assists with 45 while winning the NHL scoring title with 62 points. In the postseason, however, Cowley was forced to watch his teammates win the Stanley Cup from the sidelines as a knee injury limited him to only 2 games. The Bruins returned to the winner's circle in 1941 with a 4-game victory over the Red Wings in the finals. After surviving a tough 7-game semifinal against the Maple Leafs, the Bruins cruised through the finals, completing the first best-of-7 sweep in NHL history. In the history of Major League sports, only once has a team overcome a 3-games-to-none deficit in the final series to win the league championship. It happened in the NHL, and it happened in the spring of 1942. The Maple Leafs emerged as the jubilant victories, the Red Wings the tragic losers. Detroit reached the 1942 Stanley Cup Finals despite a regular season record of 19-25-4. Toronto, who had a record of 27-18-3, was the clear favorite, but that was before Wings coach Jack Adams devised a strategy that fooled his Toronto counterpart Hap Day. In an era when teams traditionally carried the puck over the enemy blue line, Adams scrapped that plan and ordered his players to, instead, simply shoot the puck into the corners and then outskate their foes to the rubber. It was a stroke of genius. As Adams had hoped, the radical strategy took the Leafs by surprise. In Game 1 of the finals, the faster Red Wings continually beat the Leafs to the puck and crafted a 3-2 win at Maple Leaf Gardens. They followed that with a 4-2 victory at Toronto and then won 5-2 at Olympia Stadium for a seemingly insurmountable 3-games-to-none lead. Toronto's embattled coach responded with 2 dramatically courageous changes. He benched his best scorer, Gordie Drillin, and replaced him with fourth-line forward Don Metz. Also, ace defenseman Bucko McDonald was scratched in favor of untried rookie defenseman Ernie Dickens. The newcomers provided a welcome tonic in Game 4. After falling behind 2-0, the Leafs rallied for a 4-3 win, with Metz setting up the winning goal. Late in the game, Adams, who was incensed at penalties the Wings had received, accosted referee Mel Harwood. As a result of the fracas, Adams was suspended for the remainder of the series by NHL president Frank Calder. Galvanized by the turnabout, the Leafs rebounded smartly in Game 5 back at home. This time, Metz produced a hat-trick and added 2 assists en route to a 9-3 Maple Leaf rout. Detroit had the home ice advantage in Game 6, but Toronto's Turk Broda blanked the reeling Wings 3-0. The series was now knotted up with Game 7 set for Maple Leaf Gardens. In the finale, Detroit opened the scoring with a goal by Sid Howe. Sensing victory, the Wings tightened their defense and preserved the lead through the second period and into the third, but their defensive strategy was disrupted by a 2-minute tripping penalty early in the period. The Maple Leafs' Sweeney Schreiner converted on the power play to tie the score at 1-1. Toronto took advantage of its momentum, scoring less than 2 minutes later on a goal by Peter Langell. Frantic now that they were behind, the Wings plunged headlong into the Maple Leaf zone with little concern for defense. But Toronto capitalized on Detroit's offensive obsession and surged ahead as Schreiner knocked in another goal. When the bell sounded, Toronto rejoiced with a 3-1 victory, signaling the greatest comeback in hockey history. The NHL adopts a split minor-major policy on penalty shots. The minor penalty allows for a 28-foot free shot. The major penalty allows a player to skate in on the goalie. The league adds a second linesman to each game. Each contest now has 1 referee and 2 linesmen. Future Hall of Famer Rod Gilbert is born July 1st, 1941 in Montreal. Prior to the season start, the New York Americans changed their name to the Brooklyn Americans, even though they play in Manhattan's Madison Square Garden. Rangers goalie Dave Kerr retires after 11 seasons with 203 career wins and a 2.17 goals against average. Goalie Sugar Jim Henry, a star for the Senior League Regina Rangers, is promoted. He replaces the retired Dave Kerr. Despite the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, no NHL games are canceled. The Bruins lineup is depleted when Milt Schmidt, Bobby Bauer, and Woody DeMart join the RCAF, the Royal Canadian Air Force. Rangers left winger Lynn Patrick leads the league in goals with 32 and is second overall in points with 54. Rangers playmaker Phil Watson tops the NHL in assists with 37. The Rangers' Brian Hextall wins his only scoring championship with 24 goals, second overall, 32 assists, also second overall, and 56 total points. Boston's Roy Conacher and Red Hamill, who was traded to Boston by Chicago early in the year, tie Brian Hextall for second overall in goals with 24. Sid Abel, the Red Wings' up-and-coming new star, finishes third in the NHL in assists with 31 and tied for fifth in points with 49. Detroit left wing Don Grosso is third in the NHL in points with 53 and fourth in assists with 30. The Rangers have 3 players, Brian Hextall first, Lynn Patrick second, and Phil Watson fourth among the top NHL scorers. The Americans don't win much, but rugged defender Pat Egan ensures they aren't pushed around as he wins the penalty crown with 124 penalty minutes. Without their top line, the Bruins fall to third, but goalie Frank Brimsek wins the goals against average title, 2.45. Rookie Rangers goalie Sugar Jim Henry leads the league in wins with 29 as the Rangers take first place with a 29-17-2 record. Toronto finishes in second place, 3 points out of first. Turk Broda, Toronto's stalwart in goal, is second in goals against average, 2.83, and leads the league in shutouts with 6. Future Bruin star Phil Esposito is born on February 20th, 1942, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. In the playoffs, third place Boston eliminates fourth place Chicago in 3 games. The fifth place Red Wings oust the sixth place Habs in 3 games. Detroit sweeps Boston in their best of 3 semifinal series. Toronto wins the first 2 games of their best of 7 semifinal series against the favored Rangers. The Rangers bounce back to win Game 3 of the semis on Jim Henry's 3-0 shutout, but Toronto wins 2 of the next 3 to stun the Rangers in 6 games. The finals pit the Leafs against the Red Wings in what will be a historic series. Don Grosso scores the winners Game 1 3-2 and Game 2 4-2 of the finals of the Wings win in Toronto. The Wings cruise past the Leafs 5-2 in Game 3 of the finals, giving Detroit a commanding 3-game lead. After Carl Liscombe puts Detroit up 3-2 in the third period of Game 4, Silaps and Nick Metz score as Toronto averts elimination. Following Game 4 of the finals, Detroit coach Jack Adams storms the ice and attacks referee Mel Harwood, whom Adams feels called a lousy game. League President Frank Calder suspends Adams indefinitely for his attack on referee Mel Harwood. The Leafs offense explodes in Game 5 of the finals. Don Metz scores a hat-trick as Toronto routs Detroit 9-3. Game 6 of the finals features the brilliant goaltending of Turk Broda, who records a 3-0 shutout. In the third period of Game 7, the Leafs' Pete Langell beats Johnny Mowers for the cup-winning goal. Toronto wins 3-1. Toronto becomes the only team ever to overcome a 3-game deficit in the finals to win the Stanley Cup. Postseason awards go to Boston's Frank Brimsek, the Vezina, Toronto's Syl Apps, the Lady Byng, and Rangers rookie Grant Warwick, the Calder. Tom Cowboy Anderson, the lone bright star in the Amerks' disastrous season, captures the Hart Trophy. Frank Mr. Zero Brimsek saw his goals against average soar in 41-42, yet his 2.45 goals against average was still the lowest in the NHL. With many of the hockey's best players overseas, the NHL saw more goals being scored around the league. For the first time since 1929-30, every team scored at least 100 goals. Brimsek was able to post only 3 zeros, but he was still good enough to win his second Vezina trophy. In 1941-42, the NHL was a single-division loop, and the Rangers were at the top of the standings. Brian Hextall played on the Rangers line that brought them to the top of the hill. Left winger Lynn Patrick scored more goals, 32, than any shooter. Centerman Phil Watson earned the greatest number of assists in the league, 37, and Hextall, right winger on the line, led all NHL scorers with 56 points. The Kraut line joins the RCAF. The 1941-42 season saw the end of an era in Boston. The famed Kraut line of Milt Schmidt, Woody Dumart, and Bobby Bauer played 36 games for Art Ross before answering a higher call. All three joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, where they kept their hockey skills sharp by playing in Ottawa, where their camp was based. With this super trio, the Ottawa RCAF team captured the Allen Cup, emblematic of the Senior Hockey Championship of Canada. The New York Americans renamed themselves the Brooklyn Americans for the 41-42 season. The financially desperate franchise was peppered with new and former stars, including Harry Watson, Mel Sudden Death Hill, and Charlie Rayner. The Amerks went 16-29-3 and suspended operations after the season. The NHL thus became a 6-team league and would remain so for the next quarter century. For the first time in their history, the Rangers finished atop the NHL standings in 41-42. One of the main reasons was the play of veteran centerman Phil Watson, who led the NHL setup artist with 37 assists. Also, he added 15 goals. When the going got tough, he was a handy man to have around. He spent 58 minutes in the penance, but rarely went to the confessional alone, usually taking an opposing sinner with him. The performance of Tom Cowboy Anderson's been delivered 12 goals and 20, earning the Scotland native the Hart Trophy. When the Amerks franchise folded at the conclusion of the 41-42 season, the 31-year-old Anderson found himself without an NHL employer and opted to finish his career in the American Hockey League. The turning point of the 1942 finals came on the conclusion of Game 4. Detroit was leading the game 3-2 when referee Mel Harwood made a couple of bad calls against the Wings. The Leafs stormed back to win the game 4-3, and Detroit coach Jack Adams stormed onto the ice and abused Harwood verbally and physically. Adams was suspended for the rest of the series, and the Leafs went on to win the Cup. Harwood never refereed in the NHL again. Bun Cook, Frank Boucher, and Bill Cook reunite for a charity game at Boston Garden February 6, 1942, with many NHLers overseas. Exhibition games featuring former stars were a profitable way to raise funds and awareness for the battles in Europe and the Pacific. On this evening, Boucher, coach of the Rangers, and Bun Cook, manager of the Providence Reds, stepped from behind the bench to dazzle their fans once again. By the spring of 1942, World War II was blazing. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, and NHL rosters had been severely depleted by armed forces enlistments. The situation was so bleak, said New York Rangers manager Lester Patrick, that it appeared the league would not operate in the 1942-43 season. However, in late summer 1942, the Canadian government advised the NHL owners to continue operating for the duration of the war. Still, it was hard to fill the roster since the players fit for military duty were urged to enlist, and they did so in droves. They took the youngest and single guys first, said Jack Church of the Maple Leafs. By 1942, a lot of the NHL players started getting called. No team was hurt more than recruiting drive than the New York Rangers, who had finished first in the previous season. The Rangers lost goalie Sugar Jim Henry to the armed forces, and when training camp opened in Winnipeg, the team didn't have a single goaltender on its roster. This inspired manager Lester Patrick to send an SOS to scouts all over Canada: send me a goaltender. Any goaltender. By opening night, the Blue Shirts finally did dredge up a puck stopper, but they had to reach all the way down to the Swift Current, Saskatchewan Intermediates for Steve Buzinski. Steve was so bad that he soon earned the nickname Steve Buzinski the Puck Gozinski. The Rangers ran through a string of hapless goalies from Lionel Bouvret to Bill Beveridge to Jimmy Franks, but none of them could cut it. As a result, the Blue Shirts finished in last place 11-31-8. You almost got the feeling that the armed forces had better hockey players than the NHL. In fact, the U.S. Coast Guard organized a team of hockey pros called the Cutters at Curtis Bay in Maryland. The team featured all-star Bruins goalie Frank Brimsek, Rangers captain Art Coulter, crack Blackhawks defenseman Johnny Mariucci, and Red Wings defenseman Alex Motter. Despite the drop in quality, NHL games still had a unique allure to them. Fans became fascinated with ersatz wartime replacements such as Reg Bentley, older brother of Chicago Blackhawks star Doug and Max Bentley. Reg played 11 games alongside his brothers before packing it in as a major leaguer. Meanwhile, brother Doug led the league in scoring with 73 points. The Red Wings, having lost fewer players to the armed forces than most clubs, reigned as the league's best team. Sid Howe powered the offense while Johnny Mowers shined in goal. In the semifinals, the Wings dusted off the Maple Leafs 4-2, and in the finals, Detroit swept the Bruins, who had lost their entire Kraut line to the RCAF, with Mowers tossing shutouts in the final two affairs. Despite the diluted NHL product, people were flocking to the games. The public will support hockey, concluded Montreal Gazette columnist Dink Carroll, as long as there are games to watch. The NHL suspends regular season overtime to better meet wartime train schedules. Teams are limited to 14 players. The 12-player minimum is abolished. The financially strapped Americans fold, leaving the NHL with 6 clubs. 4 to make the playoffs. The league will remain a 6-team league for the next quarter century. The regular season schedule is expanded by 2 games to 50. NHL President Frank Calder dies of a heart attack. Former Americans boss Red Dutton takes over. Former NHL referee Clarence Campbell, Calder's designee as his successor, waits in the wings. Military service in Europe and the Pacific continues to ravage NHL lineups. On January 14th, 1943, Montreal's Alex Smart tallies 4 points, including 3 goals, in his first NHL game, setting a record. On January 28th, 1943, Chicago's Max Bentley ties an NHL record when he scores 4 goals in one period. On February 6, 1943, Montreal's Roy Getliff records the league's first 5-goal game in 11 years when he beats up on goalie Frank Brimsek and the Bruins. The Habs win 8-3. While the line of Elmer Locke, Toe Blake, and Joe Benoit dominates the scoring, the Habs break in a new talent, right winger Maurice Rocket Richard. Doug Bentley, Chicago's scrappy left winger, bangs home a league-high 33 goals. Doug Bentley also wins the scoring title with 73 points. Boston's Bill Cowley leads the NHL in assists with 45. He's second behind Doug Bentley with 72 points. Chicago's Max Bentley, kid brother of line mate Doug, is second in the NHL in assists with 44 and third in points with 70. Playing for a new team, Gord Drillin scores 28 goals, third overall in the NHL for the Canadiens. Chicago's Red Hamill pots 28 goals, tying him for third in the league. Buddy O'Connor, Montreal's sophomore sensation, is third in assists with 43, ahead of Toronto's Billy Taylor with 42. The Rangers suffer a collapse without Sugar Jim Henry in goal as they fall to last place 11-31-8. Rangers goalie Steve Buzinski posts a 6.11 goals against average in 9 games and earns the nickname Steve Buzinski the Puck Gozinski. Brian Hextall, the Rangers' gifted right winger, continues to score well, 27 goals, 32 assists for 59 overall points. Detroit's Jimmy Orlando takes the penalty title with 99 minutes but is bloodied in a stick fight with Toronto rookie Gay Stewart. Detroit wins the regular season title 25-14-11. Red Wings goalie Johnny Mowers leads the NHL in victories with 25, shutouts with 6, and goals against average 2.47. The Bruins, thanks to Bill Cowley and Frank Brimsek, finish second in the NHL 24-17-9. Toronto, third place, Montreal, fourth place, take the final 2 playoff positions as Chicago and the Rangers are shut out. Game 2 of the Detroit-Toronto series extends to quadruple overtime before 20-year-old Maple Leaf Jack McLean beats Johnny Mowers for the winner. With the series deadlocked after 4 games, the Red Wings shut down Toronto with a pair of wins, taking Game 5 4-2 and clinching the series on Adam Brown's overtime goal in Game 6. The Bruins, still without their top players, play with guts and determination to beat Montreal 4-1. Three of Boston's semifinal wins are in OT as Don Gallagher, Busher Jackson, and Abe DeMarco victimize Montreal goalie Paul Bilbao. The Stanley Cup Finals are anticlimactic as the powerful Red Wings sweep Boston in 4 games. Detroit wins Game 1 of the Finals 6-2 thanks to a hat-trick by Mudbrun 2. The Wings beat Boston in Game 2 4-3. Johnny Mowers records shutouts in Games 3 and 4 of the Finals, winning 4-0 and 2-0. The Wings skate off with their 3rd Stanley Cup. Carl Liscombe, Detroit's talented left winger, leads all playoff scorers with 14 points. Bill Cowley, this year's assist leader, is awarded the Hart Trophy. Detroit goalie Johnny Mowers wins the Vezina Trophy. Toronto winger Gay Stewart, 24 goals and 47 total points, captures the Calder Trophy. Max Bentley, whose brother took the scoring title, is honored with the Lady Byng Trophy. Future goalie great Tony Esposito is born April 23, 1943, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Red Hamill says goodbye to his teammates as he leaves the Hawks dressing room on February 7, 1943, to report for his military service examination in Toronto. Saying goodbye to him, Earl Siebert, Art Wiebe, and Bob Carse. Wiebe is holding Hamill's jersey, promising to save it for Hamill's return. Hamill ended up finishing the season with the Hawks, but he spent the next 2 years in the service. When Big Bill Dwyer's son, Big Bill Jr., took over the New York Americans franchise from his dad, he moved Merv Red Dutton to the bench to coach the ailing franchise. That was in 1935. In 1942-43, Dutton was out of a job with the Americans, ceasing operations. As the consolation prize, Dutton was given the job of NHL president. He replaced Frank Calder, who died February 4th, 1943. In 1941-42, Cowboy Bill Cowley suffered a compound fracture in the lower right jaw during a game against Detroit. He missed much of the season as a result. The following year, Cowley rebounded with the most productive season of his career. The Bruins centerman played in 48 matches, scored 27 goals, and bested all skaters in assists with 45. Cowley's 72 points were one of the league lead of 73 produced by Doug Bentley. The 1942-43 season was not the end of the line for Red Wings goaltender Johnny Mowers, but it was the last stand as the first-line backstop in the NHL. In 41-42, Mowers had the dubious distinction of losing more games than any other goaltender with 19 wins and 25 losses. In 42-43, he turned this around, winning more games than anyone with 25 and topping his season with a 2.20 playoff average, a Vezina Trophy, and the Stanley Cup. They were called the Punchline, but there was nothing funny about their play. The trio of Rocket Richard, Elmer Locke, and Toe Blake terrorized opponents, especially in the mid-1940s when the Canadiens featured perhaps the most dominating teams in hockey history. Because of his elan and flamboyant goal scoring, Richard inevitably obtained the most attention, but Blake made the trio tick. He was the line's spark plug, said hockey historian William Roche, and its anchor. The Triumvirate first played together in 1943-44. Before the season, Montreal coach Dick Irvinet realized that his young right wing Richard was capable of spectacular production if aligned with the proper line mates. Irvinet theorized that the hard-nosed Locke was ideal center for Richard, but he wasn't sure about the left wing. He finally decided it would be Blake who would be worthy of an experiment on the unit, and in no time the line was made for keeps. Originally nicknamed the Mad Dog Line, the trio was more appropriately renamed the Punch Line. Fortified by this powerful unit, as well as stellar defense and goal work of rookie Bill Durnan, who finished with a 2.18 goals against average, the Canadiens opened the 1943-44 season like gangbusters. By mid-season, they had a dizzying record of 22-3 and were full 13 points ahead of second-place Toronto. Montreal finished the season at 38-5-7 and was expected to romp in the playoffs. Toronto stunned Montreal in the opening round by beating them 3-1 in Game 1, and that just served as a wake-up call. In Game 2, the Rocket turned on the juice, scoring all 5 Montreal goals in a 5-1 rout. The last time a player had scored 5 or more goals in a Stanley Cup match was in 1917, when Seattle's Bernie Morris netted 6 against the Canadiens. The Leafs closely guarded Richard in Game 3, but Glenn Harmon and Ray Getliff knocked home goals in the 2-1 Montreal win. From that point on, the Canadiens' juggernaut couldn't be contained. Montreal won Game 4, 4-1 at Maple Leaf Gardens, then wrapped up the series in Toronto with a devastating 11-0 romp. The Canadiens moved on to the Stanley Cup Finals to play the Blackhawks, who had dispatched Detroit in 5 semifinal games. Montreal jumped all over the Hawks, beating them 5-1 in the first game and 3-1 in the second, with Richard scoring all 3 goals. In Chicago for Game 3, the Hawks moved to a 2-1 lead in the third period, but Mike McMahon and Phil Watson scored for Montreal to finish a 3-2 victory and an insurmountable lead in the series. The Canadiens took Game 4 on an overtime goal by Blake, who already had 4 assists in the game. The Habs took the series in 4 games and were Stanley Cup champions for the first time in 13 years, mostly because of Richard and the punchline. Montreal would be just as devastating in 44-45, with the team going 38-8-4 and the punchliners finishing 1, 2, and 3 in the league in scoring. The modern age of hockey begins. The NHL introduces the center red line to speed up the game and reduce offsides. Delayed penalties are instituted. Action is not stopped until the guilty team touches the puck. While other teams are weakened by the war, the Montreal Canadiens emerge as a new power in the NHL. Montreal goes 38-5-7 and doesn't lose a game at home. The Habs have the league's best offense with 234 goals and easily the best defense, 109 goals against. The Paul Bilbao experiment ends as the Habs go with gifted rookie Bill Durnin in goal. In Montreal, the Habs replaced Joe Benoit on the right side of Elmer Locke and Toe Blake with upcoming superstar Maurice Richard. In his first full NHL season, Richard nets 32 goals. Montreal's trio of Elmer Locke, Toe Blake, and Maurice Richard is dubbed the Punchline. The Rangers, without many of their better players, remain mired in last place. They finish 6th, 39-5, their worst record of all time. Rangers coach Frank Boucher, age 42, attempts a comeback. He plays 15 games, notches 14 points. Goalie Tubby McCauley, an NHL rookie, loses all 39 Rangers games and posts a horrific 6.20 goals against average. The Rangers' 6.20 goals against average is the league's highest since 1919-1920. Though they can't afford the loss in talent, the Rangers lend Phil Watson to the Habs for the entire season. On January 23, 1944, Detroit routs the Rangers 15-0, setting the all-time NHL record for the most lopsided victory. On February 3, 1944, Detroit's Sid Howe scores 6 goals and a 12-2 drubbing of the Rangers. It's the NHL's first 6-goal game in 23 years. Herb Cain, Boston's 31-year-old left winger, wins the scoring title with a record 82 points, 46 points better than the previous best season. Doug Bentley, Chicago's port-side sniper, is the game's most prolific goal scorer with 38. Ex-Ranger Clint Smith, the center on Doug Bentley's line in Chicago, leads the NHL in assists with 49. Detroit's Carl Liscombe, Boston's Herb Cain, and Toronto's Lauren Carr tie for second in the NHL in goals with 36 apiece. Mud Brunto has a career year, scoring 35 goals for the Detroit Red Wings. Toronto's attack is spearheaded by Lauren Carr with 72 points. Toronto's Babe Pratt sets a new standard for offensive defensemen with 17 goals and 57 total points. The Maple Leafs, who finished 3rd overall, debut a young center with a big future, Teeter Kennedy. Montreal's Elmer Locke finishes 5th in the league in points with 72. Mike McMahon, Montreal's scrappy 5'8 defenseman, leads the NHL in penalty minutes with 99, edging Boston's Pat Egan of 95. Bill Durnin, the Habs rookie goalie, leads the league in victories with 38 and goals against average with 2.18. and is a sign of things to come. Toronto and Chicago sew up the last 2 playoff berths as Boston and the Rangers slip from contention. Toronto stuns Montreal with a 3-1 victory in Game 1 of the semifinals. It's the first home loss of the season for the Canadiens. The Habs beat the Leafs in Game 2 5-1 as Maurice Richard amazingly scores all 5 Montreal goals. The Canadiens go on to take the remaining 3 games of the series. Not only do the Blackhawks upset Detroit in their semifinal series, but they do so in 5 games. The finals are never in question as the Canadiens reel off 4 straight wins to sweep past the Hawks and celebrate their first cup in 13 years. Toe Blake, Maurice Richard, and Phil Watson fire game winners in the first 3 games of the finals as Montreal wins by scores of 5-1, 3-1, and 3-2. Montreal clinches the cup with a 5-4 overtime win in Game 4. Toe Blake converts a pass from Butch Bouchard and beats Mike Karakis at 9-12 of the extra session. Maurice Richard's 12 postseason goals are the most in the playoffs since Newsy Lalonde's 17 in 1919. Toe Blake with 18 playoff points match Newsy Lalonde's record feat of 1919. Babe Pratt, Toronto's ace defenseman, captures the Hart Trophy. Chicago's Clint Smith earns his 2nd Lady Byng Trophy. Montreal rookie Bill Durnin is awarded the Vezina Trophy. Gus Bodnar of the Leafs captures the Calder Trophy. The NHL unveiled a new rule in 1943-44 that would dramatically affect the way the game would be played. The league introduced the center red line, which opened the game to forward passing from zone to zone and blue line to blue line. The new rule transformed the sport from a stick-handling game to more of a passing game, which rewarded teams adept at rapid transition from defense to offense. opening up the passing lanes marked the beginning of hockey's modern era. By the 1943-44 season, many of the NHL's greatest stars were serving overseas in the armed forces. Toronto lost Turk Broda, Sil Apps, Sweeney Schreiner, and Gay Stewart. Boston, the entire Kraut line. The Rangers were the hardest hit, losing most of their frontline players. The franchise considered folding, but hung on despite a record of 6-39-5 in 1943-44. During the war years, the Rangers were having real trouble finding a plumber to back up their able defensive squad of Ott Heller and Bucko McDonald. After the fiasco of 42-43, they gave the nod to Ken Tubby McCauley. In 43-44, McCauley didn't give the Madison Square Garden faithful much to cheer about, however, allowing 310 goals in the 50-game season, a 6.20 goals against average, and leading his club into the NHL's dark cellar. In NHL annals, there never was a more incongruous player than Frank McCool. The Maple Leafs puck stopper for 1944-45 was a tall, skinny Albertan who appeared eminently suited for the job of librarian or bank clerk, but not goaltender. Moreover, McCool was hardly cool under pressure. In fact, this nervous Nelly was afflicted by a chronic case of ulcers and needed frequent infusions of milk to steady his stomach. Every game was a life-and-death struggle for Frank, remembered Leafs publicist Ed Fitkin. He sipped milk in the dressing room between periods, and there were times when he took sick during a game. But one thing about him, he'd never quit. Toronto turned to Ulcers McCool in 1944-45 because regular goaltender Turk Broda was serving his military duty. McCool was an average NHL goalie during the regular season, posting a 3.22 goals against average, and though he earned the Calder Trophy, experts believed that he would be Toronto's Achilles heel in the postseason. In the opening round, Toronto was forced to face the powerful Canadiens, who had gone 38-8-4 during the season. Ulcers notwithstanding, McCool performed brilliantly in Game 1, matching the Habs goalie Bill Durnan save for save. The game was tied 0-0 late in the third period when Toronto's Ted Kennedy avoided overtime with a backhand goal with 22 seconds left. McCool had scored a shutout in his first playoff game, and proving his performance was not a fluke, came back 2 nights later to stun the Canadiens once more, winning 3-2. After Montreal won the third game 4-1, Gus Bodnar's overtime goal in Game 4 gave the Leafs a 3-1 series lead. Montreal got one back, dominating the Leafs 10-3 in Game 5, but Toronto rebounded and defeated the Habs in 6 games, completing one of the most gigantic upsets in NHL history. After the 6th game, the trembling McCool bubbled, "Somebody get me a glass of milk before I pass out." The Leafs advanced to face the Red Wings, who had finished the regular season 15 points ahead of them. Many in the Toronto camp wondered whether McCool's ulcers could stand the pressure of the Stanley Cup Finals. To the astonishment of everyone, McCool staked the Maple Leafs to 3 consecutive shutouts, 1-0, 2-0, and 1-0. Finally, after 188 minutes and 35 seconds without a Detroit score, McCool gave up a goal early in Game 4, which Detroit captured by a count of 5-3. The Wings proceeded to win Game 5 2-0, though Game 6 was a scoreless affair through regulation. Ed Bruntow beat McCool at 14-16 of overtime. In the final game, McCool experienced more stomach aches. He exited the dressing room for an antacid, then returned in mint condition, while the teams battled through the third period, tied 1-1. Late in the game, Toronto's defenseman Babe Pratt hammered in a power play goal. McCool hung on for a 2-1 victory, ending the most nerve-wracking but most rewarding year of his life. I'm Charlie Saunier from the Renegades of Puck, and this has been the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. If you'd like to support more projects like this, please follow the Renegades of Puck on all social media platforms and also visit renegadesofpuck.com.